Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Luffy met Kuina first instead of Zoro part 1. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support the LIONHEART021 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Let's start this video. A little cottage on the hills of the Fuchsia village located on Dawn Island in the Goa Kingdom, we find 6-year-old Monkey D. Luffy, looking very confused. He wore a plain white shirt coupled with green shorts and simple sandals. His raven black hair was as messy as always, and his piercing purple eyes stared blankly into space. Ever since he could remember, he always felt as though something was missing. He lived alone in his little cottage, with Makino Nichin, the pretty barkeep at Party's bar, occasionally checking up on him and making sure he was taking care of himself. His grandpa stopped by every few months to spend time with him, but he knew his grandpa was a busy man and couldn't come very often. He never once complained though, he wasn't some whiny brat. Luffy spent most of his days running around, chasing butterflies or playing with the local wildlife. He's a boy with a huge sense of adventure and loved learning or seeing new things. He spent his nights reading the picture books Grandpa Garp and Makino Nichin bought him, often immersing himself in the content. Most would call Luffy an idiot, but he was not. He just didn't care about things that didn't interest him. He was very perceptive, for the most part, about certain things. Which is why we find him sitting on the edge of his bed, looking lost as he contemplated the strange dreams that have been plaguing him. For a while now, he has been having dreams of a beautiful blonde woman with soulful purple eyes, holding her arms out to him, to embrace him. It made his heart pang with a sense of loss that he didn't even know he felt at the thought of the pretty lady. She looked at him with such warmth and love that it made him long for her embrace. He didn't know if she was a figment of his imagination or maybe a memory, but Luffy desperately wanted to know about her. Why was she haunting his dreams? What was she trying to tell him? And why did she have the same color eyes as he did? He wanted to tell his grandpa, but that might just earn him a punch to the head, which wouldn't be fun at all. Makino Nichin was busy and he didn't want to bother her with his problems. It was his birthday tomorrow and he didn't want to cause unwanted tension on that day. He would be turning 7 and he couldn't wait to see what presents he got. With one final thought to the lady in his dreams, he bid the empty room a good night before turning in. Scene change. Happy birthday, Luffy. Cheered Makino as she brought her favorite little boy into a tight embrace, smothering his face in her generous bosom, much to the jealousy of some of the men in the bar. Thanks, Ni-chan. Luffy responded as he melted into her hug. He really liked Makino Nichin. She always had time for him, not to mention she made the tastiest meals. After a few minutes of fussing over him, she presented Luffy with a neatly wrapped box, which he excitedly tore into, revealing a new picture book detailing the adventures of his favorite protagonist. He awarded Makino with a bone-crushing hug and a hurried thank you before racing off to his home to get started on it, leaving behind an amused Makino who smiled warmly at his retreating back. As he sat at his little desk, Luffy lost himself in the pages of his new adventure. He wasn't the biggest fan of reading, but there wasn't much else to do in such a quiet village. It's why he loved when his grandpa came by and told him stories of his adventures. He was so engrossed in his book that he almost missed the knock on his door. He looked outside and realized that the sun was almost setting. He completely lost track of time. He rushed to the door after a few seconds, thinking that it was his grandpa stopping by. He was disappointed when he was greeted by the sight of a nondescript courier. Good evening, little boy. I'm here to deliver a package to a Monkey D. Luffy. Could you get him for me, please? The courier asked in a polite tone, trying hard not to sound like some creepy pedophile. Luffy just gave him a flat stare, which, for a 7-year-old, was pretty impressive. I'm Monkey D. Luffy. He responded blandly. The courier just stared at him for a few minutes before giving up, realizing that the little boy was indeed the one the package was intended for. After getting Luffy to sign off on it, he handed the package to the boy. It wasn't the biggest or the heaviest, but he expected the little guy to have a bit of trouble with it, just as he did, which was why he was a bit dumbstruck when he saw the boy easily carry the package away with one arm before turning away and closing the door. Luffy was both confused and excited at the package. Confused as to who would send him something besides his grandpa and Makino Nichin. He knew it wasn't from his grandpa as it was neatly wrapped with pretty purple paper. If it was his grandpa, it would be messily wrapped in old newspapers. He actually had to stop for a moment and direct a flat stare at a wall at the extremely likely scenario of that happening. As opposed to his normal behavior, Luffy carefully opened this package. He didn't want to damage the wrapping too badly. It was something instinctual within him that made him cautious to ruin it. He didn't really understand why, but he was always one to trust his instincts. After unveiling the package, it revealed a medium-sized ornate black metallic box with what looked like a red moon on it. It had a clasp that looked like it could fit a lock, as well as a small handle that looked like it could be used to either lift it, hang it up somewhere. All in all, it looked like a treasure chest to Luffy, who was getting both excited and apprehensive at the same time. His excitement won out though as he opened the chest and peered into it. The first thing he noticed was an envelope with his name written on it in an elegant print. He picked it up and looked at the rest of the contents. It was mostly empty except for a handful of plain black books. They looked like those journals you could buy from the store. There was also a weirdly shaped fruit that looked like a blue pumpkin with swirly designs on it. He disregarded the contents for now and opened the letter. As he opened it, a picture fell out of the fold. He picked it up and turned it over and received the shock of his young life at the face that stared back at him. It was the same woman from his dreams. Her beautiful blonde hair was flowing neatly down her back and she was dressed in a simple white summer dress and gladiator sandals. She didn't look to be wearing any makeup on her creamy white skin, and her gorgeous purple eyes, the same shade as his, was alight with joy as she smiled at the camera, gently cradling a bundle to her bosom that had a tuft of black hair sticking out the end. Luffy's heart sang at the sight of the woman. Her smile brought him a sense of happiness and contentment that he couldn't understand. He needed to know more. He gently set the picture down and turned to the letter. His heart almost seized up upon reading the first line. Dear Luffy, my beautiful baby boy, it's hard to describe how painful it is for me to write this letter to you, knowing that I probably will never got to tell you the things you need to know in person. I can see you playing with the stuffed bear that I bought you and caught beside me as I write this letter, and the thought of not being there for you as you grow up in this cruel world fills me with despair. I so badly want to be there to watch you take your first steps and utter your first words. But as much as I want to rage about it, I know that you will be strong enough to face what may come. If you're wondering who I am, and I won't be surprised if you have never heard of me, as I don't expect that useless deadbeat of a grandpa of yours or his equally worthless aunt to ever tell you about me. Name is Sylvia, and I am your mother. I know you are probably wondering where I am, which is understandable. The fact that you are reading this letter means only one thing: I am no longer amongst the living. I know that it may hurt to hear that, having just gotten to know that you have a mother only for it to be taken away. I want to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not being strong enough to bear the weight of my sins, for not being there for you when you need me the most. I detailed most of the information of my life, what I know about the world government and the Marines, as well as some pirates in those journals I left for you. There is also information about certain techniques and abilities that you can train so that you are strong enough to face the storm that will be ahead of you. I also managed to get my hands on a devil fruit. To be honest, I kind of stole it from the Marine headquarters. They were planning on giving it to whichever new admiral managed to get promoted to boost his power. It is a Loja class devil fruit, the Goro Goro no Mi. I know that won't mean much to you at this point, but as you read the journals I left to you it will make a lot more sense. I don't want to overload you with information that you might not fully understand, which is why I numbered the journals for you to read in that specific order to fully comprehend the information contained within. I know you may be a bit confused, or maybe you don't like to read, but I beg of you, please read those journals seriously. I want you to know what kind of place the world is and the dark side of it. I know people may think I'm crazy for telling a 7-year-old this information, and you may even end up hating me for destroying your innocence, but I can live with that, as long as you are happy and safe. What you need to know about me is that I am a very important person to the world government. As you read more you will fully comprehend just how important. The world government, and by extension the Marines, have a twisted sense of absolute justice. It was something I didn't agree with, and regardless of my position in the government, a lot of people didn't look favorably upon me for it. I don't want to color your perceptions with my bias, but I will tell you of some of the incidents that I witnessed as well as what happened to me. I want you to take that information and go out and find your own meaning and understanding of it. Some of what you read may fill you with anger, or maybe even hatred, but I want you to promise me to never give in to it. I don't want you seeking revenge or anything silly like that. What I want for you is to live, my darling son, live and be free. Never be afraid or ashamed of who you are and scream your name to the heavens if you must. As I said before, people didn't look at me in a favorable light, especially the higher ranked members of the government. They wanted me to act more like someone befitting my position, but I wasn't some passive girl. I like to think I was strong. I trained hard every day to get to where I was, and I was proud of my strength. Most people overlooked my activities, even though they frowned at it, my family included. But the birth of my son, of you, was something that they took the greatest offense to. Especially considering who your father is. I will tell you about him in my journals. I'm sorry to say though that I don't really love him, and I doubt that he loves me. It was just a silly mistake on my part, fueled by hormones and anger at my family. But that one mistake led me to the greatest achievement of my life. I want you to know, Luffy, even though I consider the act of getting together with your father a mistake, I don't consider you one at all. A lot of people will call your existence a sin and say that you should have been put to death at birth. I want you to know that, regardless of what those idiots think, you are not a sin. You are my beautiful baby boy. My crowning achievement. My pride and joy. Giving birth to you was the happiest moment of my life. I can still remember the day like it was yesterday. It was late at night and the red moon was hanging in the sky. While some would see that as a bad omen, I knew it meant that you were destined for greatness. How could I not? You are my son after all. Holding you in my arms for the first time filled me with a sense of accomplishment, knowing that I gave birth to such a wondrous being. It was love at first sight for me the moment I laid eyes upon you. I know I don't have much time left in this world, and I know you might hate me for what I'm going to do and for my own weakness. Like I said before, I can live with that. As long as you can find some use in what I've given you and be strong enough to survive, to live, then I can go to my death with a smile on my face. Even if you hate me or are ashamed of me, know that I love you with all my heart and I will be proud of you regardless of what you become. This is the end of what I need to tell you, but don't be sad, Luffy. I want you to smile that adorable smile that I fell hopelessly in love with. Remember, knowledge is power, take what I give you and turn it into your strength. If you want to turn the world on its head, then I will support you. And if you want to live life as an ordinary citizen, I will support that too. But you are my son, and I know you well enough to know that a simple life is not something that will satisfy you. Train hard, eat right and always be mindful of your manners. Find a nice girl in the future, or maybe even girls. I know my baby boy is manly enough to charm anyone. Just make sure to give me lots of cute grandbabies. I can barely find the strength to finish writing this, but this is goodbye for now, my love. Know that I will be watching over you. Go out and be the man I know you will be, and never let anyone stand in your way of you or your dreams. I love you, Luffy, now and forever. Your loving mother, Sylvia. Luffy couldn't stop the tears that were flowing from his eyes as he read the letter. He had a mother, and she loved him. His heart soared at that thought. He gently placed the letter back in the envelope after reading it once more, a massive grin blooming on his face. He always wondered about his parents, as he saw other families around the village, but his grandpa always dodged the question, and Makino Nichin didn't really know anything about his family. After a while, he just gave up on asking as it was clear even to him that his grandpa wasn't going to tell him anything. But no, he knows his mother's name, what she looks like, and most importantly, that she loved him. That alone filled him with an indescribable strength. He hurriedly pulled out the journal marked as No. 1 and diligently started to read. He read throughout the night till the break of dawn, never stopping once, other than to change books. He drank in his mother's words like a man dying of thirst who just found an oasis. Every word, every sentence that he read, his face contorted further and further in anger and hatred. He couldn't believe what he was reading. It filled him with disgust. He always had to listen to rants about how his grandpa would turn him into a strong marine, but after reading this, he would rather die than become one. He wanted to scream in anger and rage at the injustice of it all. But he bottled it up till it turned into cold indifference. His mother begged him not to give in to anger and hatred, and he will obey that to the best of his abilities. He knew though, in his heart, that he will never become a marine or work for any branch of the world government. He didn't want to be an ordinary citizen either. He wanted freedom and adventure. A small grin slowly crept on his face. The only thing left for him to do was to become a pirate. Thanks to the instructions left behind, he had enough to make himself strong enough to take on any enemies that may come his way. And while he wouldn't go out of his way to antagonize them, if he does come across some corrupt marines, there's nothing stopping him from dishing out some pain and humiliation, as well as appropriating some of their goods. His mother did say that she will be proud of him regardless of what he becomes. Maybe she realized that piracy was something that he was destined for. Nevertheless, he has at least 10 years or so to train himself in the techniques and abilities left to him, as well as the devil fruit his mother gifted him. Being a simple pirate is not enough fuel for his ambition. No, if he is going to be a pirate, anything less than standing at the top is unacceptable. He wanted his name to ring throughout the world, he wanted to be the man with the most freedom on the seas. It was in that moment, unknown to the rest of the world, that a legend was born. Monkey D. Luffy vowed to himself that he will become the Pirate King. Those who would dare stand in the way of his destiny will be crushed under the overwhelming weight of his ambition. A medium-sized dinghy, lazily floating along in the vast expanse of the seas in the East Blue, a 17-year-old Monkey D. Luffy was casually lying on his back in the little boat, with his hands on the back of his head for support and his left leg crossed over his right knee. He looked a picture of boredom. It's been a long 10 years for Luffy since that life-changing day that he received a priceless treasure from his mother. He looked back fondly at those memories. They were filled with happy times of him helping Makino Nichin in her bar, as well as learning proper mannerisms from her. It was there that he met the traveling pirate Shanks and that boisterous crew of his. Luffy instantly liked those guys and was well liked in return. He spent a lot of time bonding with them, especially Shanks. Listening to stories about their voyages and the battles they fought. Luffy was enraptured by their tales. In his mind, that was what he wanted. To have a close-knit crew, a family, and go on exciting adventures and fight exhilarating battles. He never knew his father. In terms of having met him, he of course knew who he was thanks to his mother's journals. He didn't hate the guy, he didn't believe in judging people without having met them first, but he didn't really love him either. In his mind, his father didn't really do anything that made Luffy care. Until so, he will remain somewhat indifferent to him, treating him like the stranger that he was. That being said, while he never knew his birth father, he oftentimes wondered if the time he spent with Shanks could be construed as such. He didn't really have a male role model in his life. His grandpa was a borderline sociopath, and the mayor was a bit of an ass. Shanks treated him like he imagined a father would treat his son. He knew he may have been stretching it, but it was enough for him. He treasured the bond he made with the man, and he could see in his eyes that Shanks probably left something similar. He made a promise to find him on the Grand Line, to meet at the apex of the world, and stand as equals. It was a promise that Luffy treasured. Suffice to say, Garp was not in the least bit amused at Luffy being friendly with the infamous red hair Shanks and his crew, which is why he dumped him in the mountains with a bunch of bandits led by Curly Dayton. The old bandit wasn't pleased in the slightest at having to raise another brat for Garp, her hands already being full with the other one, but conceded nonetheless, as one just doesn't say no to Garp. That led to the first meeting between Luffy and the freckled strawberry blonde tomboy menace known as Porcas D'Ann. She did not ingratiate herself with Luffy upon their first meeting, with her trust and anger issues. Luffy wasn't one to allow people to walk over him either, nor would he grovel for friendship from someone who clearly didn't want it. The volatile relationship between those two spelt a horrible time for Dayton and her family, and provided a great deal of amusement to Makino, who thought their hate-hate relationship was adorable. Fortunately, they were able to get over their issues and become friends quickly, often playing in the forests of the Goa Kingdom. It was an encounter with the pirate Blue Jam and the fiasco of the Great Terminal that led to the booming friendship between Luffy and Ann. Unfortunately, it was the death of another close friend that really brought them together. They were almost inseparable from then on. It was also a bittersweet moment for Luffy, who awakened the power within him, something that he was trying to do for a long time with little success, from the grief that he felt at the loss of one of the few friends he had. It was something that further drove how corrupt the world truly was to him. That event, along with revealing their fathers to each other, allowed Luffy and Ann to further bond, evolving their relationship to sworn siblings. Ann, while being antagonistic at first, soon became protective of Luffy to an extreme degree. It got to a point where people would get their kneecaps broken if they messed with Luffy. It honestly freaked him out at first, but slowly came to accept it as one of her more lovable quirks as time went on. While he didn't need to be protected, he allowed her to have her moments where she so just to appease her protective nature. Naturally, he wasn't any better in that regard. More than a few of the boys on the island ended up taking mysterious beatings with no memory of it, and often being left in shallow graves. They all coincidentally were perving on Ann at some point when she was blossoming into a beautiful woman in the midst of puberty. Suffice to say, Dayton, Makino and Ann all knew what happened to those boys, but kept their lips closed to spare Luffy the embarrassment he may feel if they were to tease him for it. Makino found it adorable, and even Dayton thought it was cute the way they protected each other. It was a tear-filled goodbye when Ann set off on her journey, and she made Luffy promise to find her on the Grand Line when his time comes. Naturally, while all these events were happening in his life, Luffy never once slacked off in his training. While he had to hide what he was doing, even though it hurt him to do so from the people he cared about, it was a somewhat necessary evil in his eyes. The less people that know about the information he has, the less chance of someone, more specifically his grandfather, finding out. He still loved his grandpa very much and would forever be thankful to him for the protection that he afforded Luffy, but after reading his mother's journals, he was a lot more apprehensive in terms of what he said or asked in Garp's presence. His grandpa was a hero to the Marines, and that alone made Luffy weary. He knew his grandpa would never hurt him, but still kept his guard up just in case those around his grandpa dug a little too deep and come across something that they shouldn't have. It's the same reason that he didn't eat his devil fruit right away. It would have been disastrous if Garp found out about it. Luffy would have been dumped at the nearest Marine base for training and induction. For that reason, Luffy bided his time. He was originally going to wait till he set sail to eat it, but a golden opportunity presented itself to him when his grandpa came home with a prototype handcuff in his jacket. After getting a bit tipsy, he overheard him tell Makino Nichin that it was a new type of handcuff made of Karamsiki, a substance that renders devil fruit users incapable of using their ability, as well as weakening them. Luffy saw his chance and discreetly stole it when his grandpa was passed out and put it with the rest of his stash. When Garp left again to go to headquarters, Luffy got to work on his project. He carefully separated the handcuffs before using whatever little sculpting skill he had to redesign the outside of the cuff with paint and engravings, turning it into a bracelet. It was something he was quite proud of. He immediately ate his devil fruit and was amazed at the additional power that he could feel at his disposal. He added the training of his devil fruit abilities to his timetable and was quite creative in the application of it in terms of the different techniques he thought up. Of course, by constantly wearing the bracelet around when he wasn't training didn't let anyone know of the dangerous power that he possessed. It was a win-win for him as he also built up his resistance to Kermsiki to a small degree. He still couldn't fully use his devil fruit, but some passive abilities still remained with him. The biggest difference was that he didn't feel like the life was being drained out of him, which is what he originally felt when he strapped the bracelet on. It was progress in his mind as no, he wouldn't be taken by surprise if someone managed to get him with Kermsiki. He could still use his regular strength to a degree to find a way out. It wasn't just training his body that he did either. For his 13th birthday, he received another gift. This one being a lot longer. He was awed when he unwrapped it to find a breathtaking black sword. It was a sword belonging to the katana family, being a little longer than a regular katana, but shorter than an adachi. It was pure black with 3 upward curving grooves on the blunt side. The handle was wrapped in black leather with 3 purple diamond shapes on either side of the handle. The guard was in the shape of a manji. All in all, it was a badass sword, and Luffy's eyes were literally shining with glee when he laid his eyes on it. He recognized it immediately. It was his mother's sword, Mugetsu. One of the 12 supreme grade swords. He knew he definitely needed to learn how to wield the beautiful sword. It just made people more badass to have a sword. He also carried around his precious chest that contained his mother's journals, as well as other important things he's picked up over the years. As previously stated, we find Luffy lazily lounging in his dinghy as he floats aimlessly in the ocean. He stared blankly at the sky above, not really caring about what was going on around him. As he looked out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a whirlpool that his boat was heading straight into. He let out an annoyed exhale at the disturbance of his thoughts and slowly stood. He had changed a great deal physically over the years. He now stood at an impressive height of 6 feet 1 inch. He was clad in black leather pants with black biker boots on his feet. His gleaming silver belt buckle had the head of a snarling demon on it. On his torso he wore a black high-collar leather trench coat that flared out at the bottom, reaching just below his knees. He wore no shirt underneath with the top portion of his coat exposing a bit of his well-defined chest and had the dragon fang necklace that his sister got him around his neck. On the left breast area of his coat was a red moon emblem emblazoned upon the leather. He thought it was a pretty badass look. He let his raven black hair grow out, reaching past his shoulders and stopping in the middle of his back. He had the small portion that framed his face on the right side in a single, long braid, which ended with 2 purple beads at the end point. The 3 women in his life always had fun playing with his hair, making crazy braids or weird hairstyles for fun. He always allowed them to amuse themselves with his hair. To complete his ensemble, he carried his sheathed sword in his hand, giving him quite the dangerous vibe. He liked it. As he eyed the whirlpool, he knew he needed to abandon the boat. Luckily he didn't have any sentimental value to it, so he had no problem ditching it. The problem was where he would go. He closed his eyes and focused his senses. He could hear numerous voices nearby. 2 large gatherings of people. One group was giving off a lot more negative feelings than the other. He decided to take the more docile group as he didn't want any unnecessary trouble this early on. With nary a whisper, he transformed into a blue lightning bolt and shot up into the sky. Using the clouds, he jumped from one cloud to the next till he got to the spot above his destination. In a lot quieter fashion, he zipped into one of the empty cabins on what looked like a passenger ship. This was one of the more out-of-the-box skills that he thought up for his devil fruit. He could already move at the speed of light thanks to his body basically being made of lightning. Using the cloud cover, he could probably travel anywhere. But it would drain him if used for extended periods of time. But that was fine with him, he didn't plan on using it to travel the world. He wanted to do it the old-fashioned way. This skill was handy for sneaking into places or making quick getaways. As he took stock of the room, he decided that he would lay low and see how the scene would play out for the time, as he sensed the more volatile of the group slowly approaching the passenger ship. He would decide his course of action afterwards. As he exited the empty cabin, he leisurely made his way through the lower deck of the ship, taking care not to bump into anyone official. He didn't exactly have clearance to be on this ship after all. And while he could probably neutralize every single person on this ship without lifting a finger, he long since decided that sometimes, a little subtlety worked a lot better in these situations. Which isn't to say he wouldn't brute force his way through things if push came to shove, it's just what people in his family seemed good at after all. In his mind, he imagined Garp laughing uproariously as he smashed in the skulls of whatever enemy pirates he came across. That guy's was the poster boy for brute force if there ever was one. Even his mother, from her stories that he read in the journals, was a crazy battle maniac. Damn, just thinking about the fucked up people he's related to, by blood or relation, was kind of depressing him. Oh well, he wasn't the sanest guy around either, so there's no use dwelling on it. He spotted a lot of people in fancy suits and cocktail dresses, coming to the conclusion that this was some kind of high society gathering. He spotted a pretty orange-haired girl who, to his sharp eyes, looked out of place in terms of body language. He overlooked her though, as it wasn't any of his business. He made his way out onto the deck and casually leaned against the railing as he peered out into the ocean. He immediately spotted what he was looking for. He had to take a moment to prevent himself from gagging. It was a hideous pink ship with stylized red hearts painted onto the sails. The Jolly Roger consisted of a sideways-facing skull and crossbones with another red heart in the middle of the skull. And to put the metaphorical cherry on the cake, it had the upper body of a swan as a figurehead. A giant fucking swan. What the hell was wrong with these people? It looked like that ship just sailed out of Barbie's vagina. It made Luffy almost physically ill. It was a affront to everything pirates stood for. Initially, he was planning on leaving these guys to their own devices, but now he needed to punch something. As the gears turned in his head, a terrifying grin broke out on his face. He had no doubt that his name would be plastered across wanted posters soon enough, but racking up some good PR before the shit hits the fan couldn't really hurt him. These people looked to be socialites, therefore they had a somewhat impressive social circle to exchange stories and gossip. Making a lasting impression on them can only help his cause. He doesn't really care much about playing a hero, but for now, he'll suppress his annoyance to put on a show. The lookout of the spotted the pirate ship soon after and immediately alerted the rest of the ship, causing mass hysteria and panic amongst the guests. Luffy just shook his head at the predictable nature of humans. Instead of remaining calm to try and figure a way out, they panic and look to save only themselves. It was the sad truth of the world. He heard one of the sailors identify the pirate ship as belonging to Iron May Salvita, a female pirate worth 5 million Beely. In the East Blue, it was just above average as far as bounties go, but Luffy knew that it was basically worth peanuts on the Grand Line. As the ship got closer, they launched ropes with hooks at the end, which burrowed into the wood of the passenger ship, which gave them a solid base to cross over and invade. While this was happening, Luffy bravely walked forward, which eventually drew stares from the rest of the occupants of the ship, who stopped and stared at the tall boy in black walking to his death. The pirates smirked to themselves when they saw Luffy. "Looky here, boys. We got us a pretty boy trying to be a hero. Wat say we cut him up real good. Lady Olivda will surely reward us for our great work." One of the grunts marmed out, much to the vocal acceptance of his equally slimy peers. Luffy didn't really rise to the bait. Why would he? These guys look like your cliché faceless grunts that he read about in his stories. He probably wouldn't even break a sweat taking them down. There was no use bantering with such trash. He decided against using his more flashy abilities and decided to keep it simple for now and use his raw strength to do most of the heavy lifting. As the fodder were busy gloating and flexing their puny egos, Luffy blurred forward. It looked like a blur to regular people, but Luffy wasn't even trying. It was probably the slowest he could possibly go. Years of brutal training is hard to overcome, and holding back is more challenging than he thought it would be. The first grunt ate a vicious knuckle sandwich that caved the right side of his face in, barely registering the agonizing pain before he lost consciousness. The rest of the invaders barely even had time to blink before they were dismantled by rapid punches and swift kicks, courtesy of Luffy. He wasted no time in disposing of the trash and almost had to stop himself from yawning at how pathetic these guys were. His overwhelming power and speed shone through as it was evident that these pirates had no training whatsoever. They were merely idiots who got their hands on some weapons and decided to wave it around for some reason. He was the last man standing, compared to his adversaries who were whimpering in pain on the ground. The passengers on the ship were left dumbstruck, watching a 17-year-old boy swiftly dispatch a group of about 30 full-grown pirates in the span of about 20 seconds. The shock soon gave way to jubilation as they cheered for their savior. Luffy just shook his head at these morons. He didn't really care about their adulation, but the publicity may help him in some way in the future. He spotted a chubby pink-haired boy out of the corner of his eye, who was trembling like a leaf and eyeing Luffy with a look of intense fear and apprehension. There was a loud crash that shook the very foundations of the ship, kicking up a lot of smoke. As the dust cleared, the source of the mini-quake was revealed. It was a colossal facsimile of what Luffy assumed was supposed to be a woman. She wore a pink shirt that looked to be straining over her horrifically bulky frame. She had white pants on her relatively smaller legs, along with a pair of red shoes. She wore a blue captain's coat over her shirt with a white hat with red plumage on her head. Her black hair was stringy and oily looking, and her face was the stuff of nightmares, coupled with the unattractive freckles on her face. To complete her look, she carried around a hulking piece of metal that looked vaguely like a mace. Once again, Luffy had to stop himself from blowing chunks all over the deck floor at the sight of this disgusting creature. What the hell is going on here? She thundered, her ugly face contorting into an even more nauseating expression. Al Elvita Sama.H is too strong for us. One of the beaten men managed to whimper out. The now identified Alvida didn't take too kindly to that and promptly swung her mace down at him, crushing his skull. The civilians on the ship turned green at the gruesome sight and many lost their lunch. The pink-haired coward became even more terrified if that was even possible. "Insolence," she roared before turning to the pink-haired boy. "Koby." "Why yes, Alvida-sama." The now identified Koby stuttered out. "Who is the most beautiful woman on the seas?" she questioned threateningly. Koby was about to open his mouth and answer but was beaten to the punch by Luffy. "I didn't know that whales could talk. Looks like you can learn something new every day," Luffy commented nonchalantly, much to the growing horror of the civilians, who were familiar with the dangerous reputation of Alvida and the cabin boy Koby, who looked at Luffy as though he just his death wish. The vein on Alvida's forehead started to throb wildly at Luffy's comments, and her repulsive face contorted to an even more hideous side as she looked at Luffy with murder in her eyes. "You can glare at me all you like, it won't change anything," he said, with a look of faux pity directed at her that infuriated her even more. "So you're the insolent punk that beat up my men, you don't look like the pirate huntress Kuina," she stated with a sneer on her face. "Beat up is such a vulgar term. I'm more inclined to say that I re-educated them in the manners that they seem to be sorely lacking. I'd like to say I'm sorry, and if I could find a way to do so and sound sincere I would," he replied without a shred of remorse. Alvida started to tremble in fury at the insolent boy in front of her. Without delay, she hefted her stupidly large mace, which slightly impressed Luffy though not by much, and brought it down on his head with frightening force. It drew a terrified squeak from the still cowering Koby and gasps of horror from the spectators. They expected the boy's cranium to be smashed in with his brain matter smeared all over the deck. Instead, they were left comically gaping, with their eyes bulging out of their sockets and their mouths wide open as Luffy effortlessly caught the swing and held the mace in place, his expression never changing. His grip was inherently superior to that of Alvida's, as evidenced by her struggle to free her precious mace from his clutches. Luffy just quirked a single eyebrow at her in amusement. Normally in situations like this, a protagonist will deliver a cool line like "this is gonna hurt me a lot more than it will hurt ya, but that would be a blatant lie because this is going to hurt like a bitch. I would clench my teeth if I were you," Luffy advised with a pleasant smile on his face as he cocked his left hand back before unleashing a bullet punch that nobody could track, with the exception of the thunderclap that sounded out from the impact as Alvida's grotesque body contorted around Luffy's fist before being shot off far into the horizon, leaving a twinkle in the sky. Luffy put his hand above his eyes and squinted in that direction to try and see where she flew off to. It would have been a comical sight for the passengers if they weren't so flabbergasted at his raw strength. After taking a few more minutes, Luffy dusted his hands off before turning to what looked like to him the captain of the vessel he was currently on. "Thank you, young man, for your courage and heroics that undoubtedly saved us all," the captain said humbly as he held his hat to his chest before giving Luffy a small bow. Luffy just smiled kindly to the old man, a genuine one this time, before replying. "This nothing of it, sir, I was just in the right place in the right time." "Nonsense, you probably saved our lives from that vile woman on this day, there must be something we can do to repay you," the captain insisted, much to Luffy's internal joy. It was exactly what he had hoped for. "Well, now that you mention it, I did kind of lose my boat in that whirlpool back there along with my provisions. I actually swam to this ship as it was the closest one by, hoping I could buy some food and maybe a small boat," he replied with a well-rehearsed face of sincerity. While he did feel a little bad for manipulating these people, it wasn't really something malicious. He did after all do them a huge favor and probably saved their lives. He didn't think that slightly bending the truth would do much harm. "Nonsense, young man, we will give you a small rowing boat for free. Men, stock up one of the emergency boats with provisions for at least a week," he commanded, causing his crew to salute before hurrying off to get the job done. The captain turned to Luffy once again. "I'm sorry, I didn't even get your name." "It's Luffy. Monkey D. Luffy." Scene change. As Luffy was preparing to board the boat the captain gave to him, he was interrupted by the squeak of something unintelligible. He turned to see the pink-haired boy from before staring at him in awe and fear. He quirked an eyebrow at the stuttering boy, urging him to get on with whatever he wanted. "You wanted to thank you for freeing me from Alvida. No Alvida," he managed to stutter out. Seeing Luffy continuing to stare at him, Koby decided to elaborate. 2 years ago I got on what I thought was a fishing boat, turns out it was a boat belonging to the Alvida pirates. I've been as good as a slave on that ship since then. Luckily, my skill and navigation made it so they didn't kill me, but it wasn't a pleasant experience either." Luffy continued to give him a flat stare, making the boy sweat a little, before asking him an obvious question. "If you didn't like it, why didn't you just leave?" Koby gave him a horrified look in response. "Impossible. Alvida would have found me and killed me. Just thinking about it makes me shiver." Koby shrieked out hysterically, causing Luffy to look at him with a little annoyance. "So not only are you a coward, but you're also a weakling too," he pointed out, causing arrows with the words coward and weakling to pierce Koby's chest. I really hate people like you. Luffy finished with a pleasant smile on his face. Koby slumped down with comical tears running down his face at Luffy's brutal assessment. Luffy-san, are you a marine? Koby timidly asked. Luffy momentarily went stiff at the question before letting the tension flow out of his body. No, right now, I'm not anything. I'm taking the time to scour East Blue for talented individuals. He replied. What for? Koby inquired. Luffy got a shark-like grin on his face at that question. For my pirate crew, of course. He replied, making Koby pale in realization. You're a pirate. But I'm just starting out. I'm currently looking for a crew. You should be thankful, coward. You can tell your grandchildren in the future that you were saved by the Pirate King, Monkey D. Luffy. Luffy declared with a grin on his face. Koby just looked at him with a boggled expression. DP Pirate King, so you're going to the Grand Line? After One Piece? Impossible. They call it a pirate graveyard, you know. Not to mention all the others going for the same goal. Impossible. Impossible. There's no way. It's impus. Koby's rant was cut off by a swift knuckle to the head from Luffy, who looked at him in annoyance. I don't care if it's impossible. It's my dream, and I will follow through with it, and if I die trying, so be it. I won't give up because others think it's impossible. I will be the Pirate King. Luffy declared with such confidence and conviction that Koby had no choice but to believe him, anything else seemed illogical. He was awed by the willpower and dedication of Luffy. He felt some of that courage fill him up. Do you think if I tried, I could achieve my own dream? Which is? Do you want to join the Marines and catch bad guys like Alvida? Cody announced. He was still trembling a little, but he mustered up enough confidence to speak out his dream. Oh, looks like you aren't nearly as spineless as I thought you were if you could say something like that in front of a pirate, said Luffy, causing Koby to squeak in fear. But I don't see why you can't achieve that if you're dedicated enough and willing to endure what comes your way. Koby's face lit up in joy at the endorsement from someone he was beginning to admire a great deal. He was the strongest person that he knew, and he believed that he could become a strong marine. You seem to be knowledgeable about these parts of the sea. Tell me, Alvida mentioned someone called the pirate huntress Kuina. Who is she? Luffy questioned. Code went a little pale again at the mention of that name. She's someone all pirates fear in these parts. A bounty hunter that's said to be a demon wearing human skin. She's ruthless and vicious when hunting her bounties, like a beast hungering only for their blood. From Alvida's information, she was last spotted in Shell's Town. Koby responded. Luffy suddenly got a manic grin on his face at hearing that description, making Koby nervous as hell. A demon, huh? Shishisha sounds like a good prospect for my crew. The perfect starting point. To Shell's Town it is then. He stated before finishing his packing of the boat. Koby wanted to argue with him, to talk him out of potentially getting himself killed by the fearsome pirate huntress, but for the few minutes that he knew Luffy, he knew that it would be pointless. Instead he asked another question, hoping he wouldn't get beaten up. Do you think I could get a lift with you to Shell's Town? I heard there's a marine base there, and I was hoping I could try to get in. He questioned timidly. Luffy just raised an eyebrow before shrugging his shoulders. Sure, but you will have to carry your own weight. He stated, causing Koby to break out into a happy smile. Thank you so much for your kindness, Luffy-san. Yeah, just don't get used to it. Now, I want to go find this pirate huntress before she's on the move again, so get in and let's get moving. Luffy ordered, before watching Koby scamper onto the boat before the both of them set sail. Scene change. After docking his boat, Luffy took a leisurely stroll through the town, occasionally stopping to buy a fruit. He had a black burlap sack that he carried over his shoulder containing the chest his mother gifted him. He didn't feel safe just leaving his priceless treasure on an unguarded boat. His new shadow, Cody, was diligently tailing him. While on the surface, it looked like a peaceful town, there was an underlying tension in the air that was almost palpable to Luffy's sharp senses. He immediately put his guard up. While he knew that there wasn't much threat posed to him here in the East Blue, being cautious never hurt anyone. He didn't want to become overconfident in his abilities. So he was on alert as he continued his trek before stopping before a huge stone wall with the logo of the Marines on it. Well, Koby, here it is. You're one step closer to your dream. I'm off to go see if I can find this woman named Kuina. From what I managed to gather from the townspeople, she's being kept locked up somewhere in this base. Luffy stated before taking a small leap and landing deftly on the edge of the wall. Upon looking into the courtyard, his eyes were met by a sight that took his breath away. There in the middle of the courtyard, tied to what looked like a wooden crucifix by a flimsy rope, was a woman. No, just describing her as a woman would be a crime. She had midnight blue hair that reached her lower back, tied in messy braid. She wore a plain black button-up shirt that constrained over her large breasts, along with faded blue jeans that hugged her shapely hips, coupled with black flats. Her icy blue eyes looked sunken, and she had dark rings around them. For all her natural beauty, her countenance was quite gaunt. Her lips were chapped and her stomach looked to be caving in. All in all she looked quite haunted. But that was just on the surface. Luffy's perceptive eyes picked up on her body language though. Despite the fact that she looked to be starving, her eyes screamed defiance. Her posture was primed and ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. He could make out the powerful and well-defined muscles beneath her skin. Even though she looked to be on her last legs, she looked every bit a warrior queen to Luffy's eyes. He broke out into an excited grin at the sight of her. She was absolutely perfect. He decided that he wasn't leaving this little island without her. He would have her on his crew one way or another. His contemplations were cut short by a sharp intake of breath from beside his as he spotted Koby out of the corner of his eye. He boy looked to be in serious need of new underwear. That midnight blue hair and those cold blue eyes with that fierce expression, no doubt about it, that's her, the pirate huntress Kimishima Kuina. He uttered with a terrified expression on his face. Luffy shook his head at the cowardly boy before refocusing his attention at his future crewmate. She was special, he could see that. He wondered if she would be willing to join with him without him having to resort to dirty measures. He wanted his first mate to be someone he could trust his back to, and it looked like she could be it. He only hoped she wasn't some cocky asshole. But he doubted it. There was click of a ladder hitting the wall as a ladder was propped up beside Luffy before it was scaled by an adorable little girl, looking no older than 8. She reached the top and cutely put her finger to her lips, signaling them to be quiet before climbing over the wall and making her way to Kuina. Koby was panicking and pleading to Luffy to save the girl, but Luffy just ignored him, hoping to see more of what was about to happen. He watched as the little girl offered onigiri to Kuina, who harshly turned her away. The girl never lost her smile though and continued to insist on her eating it. They were interrupted however by a smarmy-looking jackass with the ugliest haircut Luffy has ever seen in his life. He looked like a complete douchebag with his egg-shaped head, just the kind of guy that Luffy took offense to. He didn't help his case when he snatched one of the little girl's onigiri, bit a chunk out, and then promptly spat it out before tossing the rest of her creations on the ground and stomping on them in a petulant display. The poor girl was on the verge of tears and Kuina, Luffy noticed, had a murderous expression on her face. The worthless egghead then ordered one of the marines to throw the girl over the fence and while reluctant at first, the officer actually obeyed the order. Lucky for the girl, Luffy was on the scene and he gently scooped her out of the sky and gently placed her on the ground before playfully ruffling her hair, earning a cute giggle from the girl. Luffy told her she should probably go home and that he would find her later on. Luffy looked to Koby and noticed that the boy was in the middle of a moral dilemma after witnessing a scene that shattered his beliefs of what the Marines were supposed to be like. Luffy ignored him and turned back to face the courtyard. He would never consider himself a hero, but seeing these corrupt Marines, the kind he hated the most, attempt to hurt an innocent little girl like that for no other reason than to fuel his own ego, it really made his blood boil. Although he intended to keep a low profile, he couldn't ignore something like this. But first, he needed to speak with the object of his interest. He stealthily scaled the fence and swiftly made his way to her before quietly standing before her, silently observing her. Kuina noticed the shadow obscuring her and looked up to see a handsome-looking guy in black staring at her with the most entrancing pair of eyes she's ever seen. His piercing gaze sent a shiver up her spine for some reason. She wasn't sure if it was a good thing or not. She refused to show any weakness though and stared defiantly back at him. After about a minute of staring, she was about to open her mouth and give out a scathing comment when she noticed his eyes soften as he looked at her. Something in that gaze of his made her tummy flutter giddily. I won't ask you why you haven't broken out yet when those ropes are clearly not a match for your strength. I originally came here to recruit you to my pirate crew, but I decided to put it on hold for now. I can see in your eyes that you have something to prove. Whether it's to these Marines or to yourself, I won't ask. I won't question your resolve. I will be in town for a while. If at any time you are in danger I will step in. Luffy said to her, much to her shock and bewilderment. She didn't know how to fully process what he just said to her when Luffy turned around and started to walk away. Wait. Kuina called out to him. The onigiri, feed it to me please. She requested. Her voice, even though it was hoarse from a lack of water, still had a beautiful lilt to it that was quite pleasant to Luffy's ears. He stared into her eyes when she made a request, seemingly searching for something, before smiling softly and gathering up the dirty onigiri from the ground and depositing it into her mouth. She grimaced as she chewed on it, having great difficulty. After finally swallowing it, she took a breath before facing Luffy once more. It was delicious. The best onigiri I have ever tasted, she declared. Luffy got the meaning behind her words and gave her an approving smile and nod that pleased her immensely for some reason before leaving his parting words for her. Good luck in your mission, Kimishima Kuina. I look forward to what else you can show me. As Kuina watched the back of the stranger disappear, she was left with a cacophony of conflicting emotions. She was never what one would call girly. She was a tomboy in her younger years, and even after blossoming into an astounding beauty, she never gave in to her more earthly urges. That being said, she did appreciate the few good-looking men that she came across. Which is why she couldn't deny the physical attraction she felt to the mysterious stranger. He was a very handsome man, there was no denying that. But there was something about him that she couldn't quite put her finger on. Something about the aura around him that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. He had the eyes of an apex predator. Kuina was never one to shy away from a fight, in fact she reveled in the feeling of battle. She also noticed the sheathed sword he carried at his side. But something deep and primal within her was warning her about the man. He didn't even seem to be making any attempt to hide his nature from her. It was something that baffled and unnerved her. Most people always have some kind of agenda in approaching her. Whether it was to use her strength or wanting her body. But this man didn't seem to exhibit any of those signs, with the exception of him stating that he wanted to recruit her for his pirate crew, something that she never even considered doing before. But she couldn't deny that there was something in those eyes of his, something that thrilled her. In her semi-delirious state, she couldn't quite pin it down and decided to put it in the back of her mind. She only had 10 more days to go before she wins this little challenge, then she can go on her way, continuing her perceived journey to the top. Scene change, really? She ate all of it, the little girl, Rika, exclaimed excitedly. Her eyes were alit with joy at the information Luffy gave her. She sure did. She said it was the most delicious onigiri that she's ever had. Luffy added. The smile on the face of Rika was immovable. Koby on the other hand, looked to be supremely confused. I don't understand, I thought that Kuina was some kind of demon. He pondered. No. Kuina-nichan is a good person. It's all that stupid Helmappo's fault. Rika insisted before regaling the two travelers the story of the marine base captain, Morgan and his cowardly son Helmappo, along with the terror and oppression they wrought throughout this town. Koby was horrified at the prospect of the marines being corrupt, while Luffy didn't seem all that bothered as he was expecting something like this. Rika then told her about how Kuina saved her from Helmappo's wolf and how she was unjustly arrested for it. Apparently she made a deal where if she survived 30 days tied in the middle of that courtyard without food, she would be released. Luffy just nodded to himself, now understanding why she didn't just break out when she could. It was a matter of pride for her. She was clearly a woman out with something to prove. He admired that about her as he wasn't. His musing were cut short as that egg-headed idiot, who he now knows is named Helmeppo, walked into the bar with 2 marine officers escorting him. Luffy had to use all of his training and self-control to keep himself from walking over to that moron and stomping him into the ground. Helmeppo walked in like he owned the place and sat down with his feet on the table. Bring me a drink, wench. I'm hungry as well, so we're all going to eat for free. He declared before laughing obnoxiously. The patrons of the restaurant were shooting him wary and fearful looks. Rika's mother, who owned the restaurant, quickly got to work in preparing his meal, hoping to appease him so that he would leave her family alone. What's taking so long? Hurry up. He petulantly demanded. As he sat there like some faux king, swirling his glass of wine, he nonchalantly threw out some provoking words. Oh, that's right. Since I'm tired of waiting, I've decided to execute Kuina tomorrow. Look forward to it, everyone. He finished with that annoying laugh of his. His gloating was cute prematurely though when an overwhelming sense of bloodlust filled the restaurant. The murderous intent shook the very core of those regular citizens, and even the marines were barely holding themselves together. There was also a conspicuous wet spot that appeared on Helmeppo's trousers. Suddenly, as quickly as it came, it vanished. As Koby looked around the restaurant, he noticed that Luffy was missing as well. Scene change. Luffy had to work hard to keep himself from lashing out at that idiot. This further drove home the nature of some of the scum that populated the marines, hiding behind their absolute justice to commit atrocities. He quickly scaled the wall of the base and found himself in front of Kuina once again. She looked up at him in confusion, wondering why he's back so quickly. There was something in his demeanor though that set alarm bells ringing in her head. His posture was tight, as if coiled, waiting to strike. You again? I'm here to free you. Luffy said. No. I have 10 more days to go, and I'm not about to let you ruin the work I've done. I'm almost there. She argued back. Luffy just looked at her and shook his head sadly. I'm sorry to say that you aren't going to last that long. The egg-headed one, I believe his name is Helmeppo, just announced, quite publicly I might add, that you are going to be executed tomorrow. He told her. Kuina had a look of shock and anger on her face. She couldn't believe it. For 20 days she endured the hunger and abuse hurled her way from these damn marines, only to find out that they were never planning on seeing out their end of the bargain. It made her a little sick to her stomach to see how naive she had been in believing in their word. She looked up to the man, at a loss at what to do. He said he was going to free her, but he was a pirate. She would be labeled an outlaw if she accepted his help. But what other choice does she have? As she was in the middle of her dilemma, the voice of the man sounded out once again. "Tell me, Kimishima Kuina, what is your ambition?" he asked, getting a wide-eyed look from the girl. He just smiled at her in response. "I can see it in your eyes. The thirst, the hunger to prove yourself. You have the eyes of someone with a weighty ambition. I know, because I see those eyes whenever I look into the mirror every morning. So tell me, pirate huntress, what is your greatest desire? What motivates you to swing that sword of yours? What is your dream?" Luffy pierced her with an intense stare, one that she readily returned without flinching. Time seemed to stand still for a moment as these two stared each other down. Neither blinked. There was absolute silence. It was broken when Kuina moved her lips. "The promise. Not only to a late friend, but also to myself. My name would be heard throughout the world. I will stand at the top. I will become the greatest swordswoman in the world," she declared with the utmost conviction. She didn't even sound doubtful. She said it like it was an undisputable fact, already carved in stone. Luffy felt the smile on his face stretch from cheek to cheek at her declaration. Before he knew it, he threw his head back and let out an uproarious laugh in response. Kuina felt her face grow red in anger and humiliation at his response. It wasn't the first time this happened. Whenever she stated her dream, people would laugh at her. They would scoff and say that a woman could never achieve that position. Even her father, even though she loved the guy, he gently told her that as she grew older, she would be unable to withstand the blows of her male counterparts, no matter how skilled she was. He tried to be kind about it, but it only served to infuriate her, which is why she took her sword and left. Journeying around East Blue, defeating anyone in her path. She would prove them all wrong. She would achieve her goal. It was the last thing she did. She was about to tear into the guy who dared laugh at her dream before he stopped suddenly to address her. "Forgive me for that, but I couldn't help myself. I didn't think I'd come across someone like you in this part of the world. You and I aren't that different, Kimishima Kuina," he said to her earnestly. While her anger was still there, she was now a bit confused as to what he meant. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm the man who will become Pirate King," he declared, causing her gape at his bold proclamation. He wasn't done though. "I've already decided. I want you in my pirate crew, Kuina. We both have crazy dreams, but that's what makes it fun. And as the future Pirate King, if my first mate didn't at least become the greatest swordswoman in the world, I would be highly embarrassed." He finished with a smirk in her direction. Kuina's eyes widened in shock at his words. Her stomach started to flutter and her heart started to beat loudly in anticipation. She realized he wasn't laughing at her in contempt. He was laughing in happiness at finding someone he could relate to. But most importantly, for the first time in her life, Kuina's dream was acknowledged by someone. She finally recognized that look in his eyes. It was one of approval and acknowledgement. For Kuina, who went her whole life with people telling her that she would never be able to accomplish her dream, his endorsement of her ambition, and the fact that he unequivocally seemed to believe that she could accomplish it, was like a shot of adrenaline to her veins. She felt a smile bloom across her face. This was something that she never thought she would find. "Regardless of what happens from now, you will be marked as an outlaw by these worthless Marines. Going against them in any way, even if you are in the right, will see to that. I don't really care much about that, and I can tell that you're a woman who doesn't care much about what others think of her. So I will ask you again, Kimishima Kuina, what will you do? There's only one path left and it's straight to the top. Come with me and we will turn this world on its head," Luffy declared with a smirk of anticipation on his face as he held his hand out to her. "That doesn't leave me with much choice now, does it? You must be the son of a demon," she said ruefully, but there was no heat in her words as she grinned up at him. She already made up her mind a while ago. There was something different about this man. Something that called out to her. The fact that he believed in her also played a large part of it. The absolute confidence she saw in his eyes, at himself, at accomplishing his dream and directed towards her, made her tremble with excitement and anticipation. "You're right, I don't care if it's as a demon or a pirate. My name will be heard throughout the world, and if you ever do anything to impede that, I will have you apologize to me at the end of my sword," she declared, although it was obvious to the both of them that she said it just for the sake of the moment. They both knew in their hearts that it would never happen. It was the extent to which they seemed to click with each other. There was no turning back for her now, not that she would anyway. She would follow this man to their rightful places, at the summit of the world. "So what's our next move, Senshin?" she questioned, causing Luffy's smirk to turn into a smile of happiness at recruiting his first nakama. And what a recruit it was. "Well, I can't have my swordswoman walk around without a sword. Do you have any idea where yours is?" he inquired. She felt a little shiver go down her spine at the way he said "my swordswoman." The rightness of that statement was something she couldn't explain. "Probably in the room of that weirdo, Helmeppo," she answered. Luffy nodded in response before taking in the direction of the base. Kuina looked incredulously at his back, about to call out to him to at least free her before taking off, before remembering what he said when they first met. He trusted her to have the strength to free herself, something that made her smile. She didn't want to prove her captain a liar and promptly exerted her strength, causing the flimsy ropes around her to groan in protest before snapping. She got to her feet and took the time to stretch her body and work out the kinks from being in the same position for almost 20 days. There was nothing left to do but wait for her captain to return with her sword. Luffy expertly infiltrated the base, using his considerable skills and stealth to get in silently. He saw that most of the base was unguarded. He felt a lot of people congregated at the top of the base. He didn't want to look a horse in the mouth though and took off in the direction of the only other person in the base. He recognized the signature immediately and was going to enjoy caving his face in. He came to the stop in front of a bright pink door with flowers and butterflies decorating it, along with a nameplate that read Helmeppo. He almost gagged at the extent of that guy's creepiness. He kicked the door in without haste. "Knock knock motherfucker," he called out, mentally giggling to himself. He's always wanted to do that. It was something he read in one of his favorite adventure books. Helmeppo looked like a deer caught in headlights at the intrusion. Because of who his father is, nobody ever bothered him in any way. He lived a pampered life with no consequences. "Who the hell are you? Do you know who my daddy is? I will have you." His tirade was cut off as Luffy appeared before him and delivered a swift kick to the balls, causing Helmeppo's eyes to bug out of their sockets and his mouth to open in a silent scream. Luffy then grabbed him by the hair and brought him face to face. Helmeppo would swear to anyone that listened that he was staring into the eyes of a demon. He knew that he was definitely going to need a change of underwear. "I was going to ask you where you left Kuina's sword, but I can see it in the corner of your stupidly girly room. I would suggest you get a hobby and maybe a testosterone patch as well," Luffy said before delivering a brutal headbutt. The crunch of Helmeppo's now broken nose echoed throughout the room. Luffy dropped the dead weight before walking over to the sword leaning against the wall. He recognized it immediately. It had a white sheath and handle with a gold oval guard, along with a grey diamond pattern doing down on either side of the handle. It was one of the legendary Oazamano 21. Wadu Ichimonji. He just smirked at how fitting the weapon seemed to be for his first mate. A pure white katana to offset his black one. He grabbed the sword and made his way out of the room. He wasn't quite done though. He also took some of the ridiculously cutesy stuffed animals that Helmeppo kept in his room, goodness knows for what, along with a tiara. He quickly made his way to Captain Morgan's room. After breaking in, he used a static bolt to override the lock on the safe located under a hideously obnoxious painting of Morgan, before stuffing all the money he could fit into his chest. He also snatched up the latest batch of wanted posters. His final act was to strategically plant those stuffed animals and tiara into his safe, along with an IOU note that depicted a middle finger. He laughed at his handiwork before taking off. He felt the people on the roof beginning to panic before making their way to the courtyard. Looks like Kuina was discovered. Oh well, it wasn't like she was trying to hide or something. He swiftly made his way to Kuina before she got turned into Swiss cheese. He came out just in time to see a row of Marines pointing their rifles at his nakama, with that imbecile, Morgan, standing behind them directing traffic. Luffy wasn't going to be having any of that though. "Renkyaku," he called out whilst rapidly sending a kick to the empty space between the Marines and Kuina. A sharp wind blade cut through the air, digging a shallow trench in the ground. The Marines and Kuina alike stopped to gape at the inhuman feat. "I don't appreciate you pointing those dangerous weapons at my friend. If you value your life, you will not cross that line," Luffy warned, causing the Marines to gulp in fear, clearly intimidated him. Kuina just looked at him with a little awe, still trying to figure out how he did what he just did. She snapped out of her daze though when he handed over her precious sword. She took a moment to enjoy the way it filled her hands. It was like reuniting with an old friend. Another traitor. "I'm surrounded by insolence. Kill these two worms. I will not have anybody daring to defy my greatness," roared out the supposedly infamous Captain Axe-Hand Morgan. Luffy just looked at him with a deadpan stare. He wasn't impressed at all. The standards in the Marines were really dropping if any idiot like this guy could make captain. He was just a bulk of useless muscles. Not even worth Luffy wasting another breath on. "Well, first mate Kuina, it's your time to shine," Luffy stated with a look of anticipation in his eyes. Kuina noticed the look and realized that her captain wanted to see her in action. From his posture, it was clear that he wasn't even expecting to intervene. It was a little thrilling to see the complete confidence he had in her. "Hi, Senshin," she replied, before rapidly crossing the space between her and the Marines, quickly getting into the guard of the one closest to her, before delivering a slash to his chest. It wasn't fatal, but it certainly hurt like a bitch. He would need medical attention soon. The others, seeing one of their own get taken down, promptly charged her. It was to no avail though as she skillfully danced around their attempts to strike her. Her nimble footwork and superb reflexes kept her completely out of their reach, which she capitalized on by delivering swift and precise strikes with her sword to their unguarded bodies. Little by little, the large group of Marines started falling like flies, clearly completely out of their depth in terms of skill and intelligence as compared to Kuina, who was covered in quite a bit of blood from the numerous slash wounds she delivered to her enemies. Many of the Marines watching on started to tremble in fear, finally understanding the fearsome reputation the woman garnered was no fluke. She was an absolute beast in battle. Fear started to override their bodies as they backed away from the scene. What are you worthless ingrates doing? It's only one woman. Are you so weak that you can't kill someone so pathetic? Morgan roared out in anger at him. Men. Kuina glared in his direction at his hexist remark, while Luffy just laughed in amusement. Ha! Even starved and barely rested, my swordswoman is too awesome for an entire marine base to handle. He cheered out, causing Kuina to preen at the comment. The belief and trust he had in her skills was absolutely intoxicating to Kuina. She reveled under the praise and acknowledgement of this man that she barely even met, but she didn't care. It somehow just felt right to her. See Captain Morgan sir, we can't, she's too strong for us. One of the nondescript Marines managed to stutter out. His fear of the blood-soaked Kuina eclipsing that of his fear of Morgan. Many of the soldiers around him were nodding their heads in agreement. Morgan, upon hearing this, went silent. There was a vein visible on his forehead that was throbbing wildly. His grotesque physique bulged out and his eyes were bloodshot in utter fury. Those weaklings who think that, put your pistols to your heads and pull the trigger right now. I am the highest ranking officer in this base, therefore everything I say is right. I am great. I will not have insubordination in my base. If I tell you to kill this pathetic woman, you will do so even if you have to die trying. Morgan bellowed out in rage, spittle escaping his mouth. He looked a picture of a mad dog at the moment. Luffy looked on dispassionately and Kuina in shock as the Marines actually made to follow his order and put their pistols to their heads. Most of them were in tears, but they didn't stop. Luffy just shook his head at the sheer idiocy that he was seeing. This is why he couldn't stand the Marines. Though he had no obligation to save these spineless maggots, he wasn't going to give Morgan the satisfaction that came with his, probably final, orders being obeyed. His distinctive purple eyes glowed slightly before his pupil shrank slightly. Suddenly an invisible shockwave passed through the courtyard. The soldiers, Morgan and Kuina, felt it on their very skin. The feeling of oppression, the unexplainable sense to get on their knees in obedience. It was an aura of pure dominance washing over them. Suddenly, as quick as it appeared, it was gone. Not without consequence though. Every Marine in that courtyard that wasn't Morgan fell over in blissful unconsciousness, some foaming at the mouth. Morgan's eyes were bulging comically at the sight. His mind couldn't comprehend what he was seeing at all. Kuina wasn't faring much better. It was such a mystical thing to experience. The only people left standing was herself, Morgan, and her captain Luffy. It clearly wasn't Morgan that caused this, so it logically meant that Luffy had something to do with that monstrous presence. She looked back to him, causing him to look in her direction to send her a cheeky wink. She was absolutely floored. Her captain clearly had more to him than meets the eyes. This only proved that she made the right decision in following this man. Well, now that the fodder are out the way, I believe that the illustrious Captain Morgan here doesn't believe that he can be bested by a woman. Luffy commented, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He then turned to Kuina with a genuine smile on his face. Kuina, this man is a weakling who hides behind his men and his position. He isn't even worthy of breathing the same air as you. Trash like him should be groveling at your feet instead. This will be my first order as captain. Please educate the dear Captain Morgan here about the hierarchy of the world and show him his rightful place. Luffy ordered with a dark smirk on his face. The vicious grin that spread across Kuina's face sent a shiver of fear racing through Morgan's spine. Kuina felt her blood boil at her captain's words. Her insane bloodlust skyrocketed as she tensed in anticipation. She felt absolutely giddy. It was like the shackles came off her and she didn't have to hold back any longer. She never felt this free before. She would do her best to not make a liar out of her captain. Hi. Senshin. She affirmed before taking her stance. In that time, Morgan seemed to regain his bluster. I will make you insects regret ever hearing the name Captain Morgan. You see this axe hand, it was thanks to this hand that I rose in the ranks. I would use it to spill your blood all over this base, you worthless woman. Morgan screamed out before charging at Kuina like a wild bull. Kuina just let out a breath and relaxed slightly. Her captain had complete confidence in her and she wasn't going to make him regret that. She refused to lose to a lowlife like Morgan. As he closed in on her, she used her more agile body to twist out of the trajectory of his axe swing before her blade sung through the air, leaving a vicious cut on Morgan's left flank, causing his blood to spray out and him screaming in agony. The precision of her cut made it so that she cut just deep to nick the vessel. It would cause him immense pain the longer it went untreated, but it wouldn't cause death. Morgan pushed past the agonizing pain and spun around, attempting to decapitate Kuina with his axe. She anticipated this though, not to mention he was moving at a snail's pace and crouched low, allowing the axe hand to pass overhead before springing back up and using her momentum to deliver a brutal slash right up his chest with an uppercut-like motion. Morgan wailed in agony at the sensations he was experiencing. It was clear to Luffy and Kuina that for all his bluster, Morgan didn't really have a high pain tolerance. It was disappointing for Kuina, who was expecting a fight, but instead this buffoon had absolutely no skill whatsoever. In the last charge, probably his huge ego overriding his self-preservation instincts, Morgan made a full-on charge at Kuina, once again putting his full weight behind the swing of his axe. Kuina had to stop herself from rolling her eyes at this idiot and once again sidestepped his charge, causing him to stumble past her and embedding his axe hand into the ground. Kuina, seeing an opportunity, stamped on the back end of the axe, causing it to sink further into the ground before stomping on Morgan's forearm, breaking not only the support he used to keep his axe attached to his arm, but also the bones in his arm. Morgan pulled his arm back, leaving the axe still embedded in the ground, screaming in pure agony. Kuina wasn't in the mood for mercy though, and sprung forward before delivering a multitude of deep cuts to his torso and face in the span of a few seconds. Morgan had no choice but to slump over, his body shutting down from the amount of pain he was forced to endure. Kuina was breathing a little heavy, tired from exerting herself after having been starved for 20 days. She looked behind her towards her captain and absolutely drank in the look of pride he had on his face. Like he never expected any other outcome. She felt a happy smile come to her face before slumping down. Before she hit the ground though, she felt the strong arms of her captain hold her up, giving her a grin and congratulations, not at all minding all the blood on her clothes. "You must be starving. Let's get you some food. I know there's an excited little girl waiting to see you," he said, making her smile go wider. Scene change. We currently find Luffy at the dock, loading provisions onto his boat in anticipation of setting sail. After Kuina defeated Morgan, she absolutely gorged herself on the delicious food made by Rika's mother. She apologized between bites, but nobody held it against her as she was starving. After having at least 5 helpings, she declared that she needed a shower and some new clothes. Luffy handed her a stack of beeli, as much as she tried to protest against it, to get her stocked up on clothes and whatever other necessities she needed. Luffy was joined by Koby, who was excitedly telling him that he was accepted into the Marines immediately due to the current shortage that they were facing. Apparently Commander Ripper decided not to take action against Kuina for her actions, although he did warn her that it was probably a good idea to get off the island as soon as possible. It was fortunate for Luffy that nobody, with the exception of Koby, even knew that they were pirates. Luffy was brought out of his musing by the sharp intake of breath and the sound of a body hitting the floor coming from beside him. He looked out of the corner of his eye and saw that Koby had fainted. As he turned around, he fully understood why the boy reacted in such a way. Standing before him was a cleaned-up Kuina. Now that the dirt and grime wasn't marring her, you could see the beautiful milky complexion that she had. Her midnight blue hair was in an elegant braid that was worn over her left shoulder. She wasn't slouching in hunger either and stood at an impressive 5 feet 9 inches. Her clothes were very different as well, choosing to go a more traditional route in terms of a sleeveless black battle kimono with purple accents at the bottom that reached mid-thigh. There was also a design of a red moon on the right bicep, the same as the one on Luffy's coat. It had a plunging neckline, leaving her generous cleavage on display. She had on tight black shorts to preserve her modesty, along with black high-heeled boots that stopped just below her kimono. She had a bracelet on her right wrist, as well as blue teardrop earrings on both ears. All in all, coupled with a sheathed sword in her hand, she looked every bit the femme fatale. Hexy and dangerous. Well, you certainly clean up good, Kuina. You look amazing. Not to mention dangerous. I like it. Luffy stated with a cheesy thumbs up in her direction, causing her to release a melodic laugh. She was glad to see her captain wasn't some pervert, evidenced by the fact that there was no lust in his eyes, just pure admiration. Thank you, Senchum. So where are we headed to next? She questioned as she climbed onto the boat. Well, I heard Buggy the Clown was spotted in Orange Town, not too far from here. He has a bounty of about 15 million beeli. The 4th highest bounty currently in East Blue. Since we aren't officially pirates, there's nothing stopping us from turning that bounty in and earning some startup capital for our future exploits. Not to mention it would serve as great training. Hopefully we can come across some other exceptional people for us to recruit. There's no going back, no, Kuina. Are you ready to take this world by storm? Luffy questioned mischievously. Kuina just grinned back in response. I don't regret it at all, Senchum. I will follow you wherever you go. She replied earnestly, getting Luffy to smile genuinely at her. The world awaits us, Kuina. Let's set sail. He declared before letting the currents guide them off into the sunset, completely forgetting about Koby, who was still twitching on the ground with a trail of blood flowing down his nose. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support the LIONHEART021 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.